Gewaldig. That's beautiful. Yeah. On Zucker. Good morning, bruchim abayim, bruchim abayim. Oh, thank you. Morgen, Abshal, was machte? Morning. Welcome back, everybody. Or I should tell myself welcome back, right? Morgen. He holds up this place. I'm telling them that you hold up this place. The Haltstoff, the art. Okay, good morning, everybody. And if you don't have the text here, the papers, I want to thank Reb David and Reb Nechemia Kaplan, father and son, for these beautiful copies. So this new discourse that we will be exploring is really a very, very emotional. It's very moving, especially the second half. It deals with one of the most, or maybe the most painful subject in life, which is really not a subject, and that's, the suffering. The inner world of suffering. It's really a journey into the inner world of suffering from the soul's perspective. I learned this a few years ago. Myself, I learned it, and I was very good. That sounds like me. And I was very taken by it. But recently I learned it, like a week or two ago I learned it, and I just at some point I just started to cry. Especially, as I said, the second half. It's a very, very moving and very powerful mimer, essay, discourse. Okay, now just about the copies. This is a mimer, a discourse from a sefer known as Derech Mitzvosecha. This was written by the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was the grandson of the Baal Tanya, Reb Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, the son of his daughter, Dvaira Leah, and the third Rebbe in Chabad. He succeeded his uncle and father-in-law, the Mittler Rebbe. He wrote a sefer called Derech Mitzvosecha. What is it? He called it actually Taimei HaMitzvahs. He goes through many of the 630 mitzvahs in the Torah, but explains them from the spiritual, emotional, and psychological perspective. And in that sense, it's an extraordinary work, because he'll start off with the mitzvah, the way it's described in halachic works, usually the Sefer HaChinuch, which is an encyclopedic masterwork of all the 630 mitzvahs. And then we'll delve into this particular mitzvah from a spiritual perspective. And he goes through many of the mitzvahs. This one that we chose is actually on this week's Parsha, Parshas Emor. And it deals with a very, very difficult mitzvah. Till today, I get quite a few letters from people from time to time trying to make sense of this, because it's hard to understand. As you could see in the headline, it's Isur Avodas Kohen Balmum Uknisasi Lahechel. It's the prohibition against a Kohen who has disabilities or physical deformities or blemishes to serve in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan, and even to go into the Heichel, to the inner sanctum of the Beis HaMikdash that was reserved only for Kohanim who did the Avodah. That's the place where the menorah was, where the candelabra was. The Kohen would go into light the menorah. The shulchan was there. They had the showbread over there, the lechem aponim. The inner altar was there. They would burn the incense every morning and evening, morning and after mizbech. That was called the heichel. It was the roof part of the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash, and it wasn't entry for everybody. There were the parts in the courtyard known as the Azara that other people can go in. Koyanim, not Koyanim, men, women. You had Ezes Yisrael, Ezes Nashim. Yeah. You had the Harabayas, Temple Mount. Everybody could go in. But then there was the Heichel, the inner part of the Beis HaMikdash, before the Holy of Holies, right before the Kodesh HaKadoshim. This is what this mitzvah is discussing, and it comes in Parshas Emor. He said Parshas Emor. It's in the order of the Parshas, which that's how the Sefer HaChinuch did it. The Sefer HaChinuch is, you see, the Gemara says that there's 630 mitzvahs, but doesn't say what are the 630 mitzvahs. In Chumash, it doesn't say mitzvah 1, mitzvah 2, mitzvah 3. There's just a list of mitzvahs in different Parshas. It doesn't even say in Chumash how many mitzvahs there are. Right? People don't realize that. The Gemara, Maseches Makkah, says we have a tradition to 630 mitzvahs. It doesn't say which ones. So the Moinei HaMitzvahs, the great sages, had a tremendous work to do. You take a Chumash and figure out what are the 630 mitzvahs. For example, every time it says you should keep Hashem's mitzvahs, that's not one of the 630 mitzvahs. That's called the mitzvah klalis. It's everything. So you have to figure out. We know there's 248 positive, 365 negative. So this is not such a simple thing. The Rambam made a Sefer HaMitzvahs. He did a list. The Ramban wrote a book with a commentary on Sefer HaMitzvahs, arguing with a lot of them, and has his list. You had what's known as the Bahag, Baal Halachas Gdolos, wrote a list. Smag, Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol. Yeah. The Sefer HaChinuch is a sefer that was printed by one of the Spanish sages, already very early on, the 12th century, the 13th century, but we don't know the author. He wrote a sefer, he didn't write who he is. So the assumption is his name was Rabbi Aaron Halevi from Barcelona, from Spain, the Ra, Reish Aleph Hey, but it's also not clear because it's not decisive. So he wrote an encyclopedia, very clear, based on the Parshas of Edei Mitzvah. And it's a beautiful work because he tells you the mitzvah, he tells you the basic details of the mitzvah, and he tells you the reason for the mitzvah. Or at least the reason, the way he presents it, which is one of the reasons for the mitzvah. So he follows here in Derech Mitzvosecha that order, and he quotes the Sefer HaChinuch, and then he goes to the next layer. Parshas Emor. Shelo yikonis kohen balmum lahechel v'lemizbeach. A kohen who is a balmum, be'ezayim is a balmum. And what's the definition of a balmum? A balmum is there's pashut physical blemishes in his body, deformities, blemishes. He wasn't allowed to go into the heichel, to the sanctuary, ulemizbeach, or to the place to serve by the altar. Shenemar. Pasuk says in Parshas Emor, Perek Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Gimel, Leviticus 21:23. Achel ha'pareiches layavai v'lamizbeach layigash kimumboy. He can't go into the pareiches, which means the room where they had the curtain separating the sanctuary from the Holy of Holies. Nor should he get close to the altar to serve like the other koyanim, the outer altar. This is even in the courtyard where they did the service of the sacrifices. Kimumboy, because of the blemish in him. V'oid bo shnei lavin b'avodas balmum kavua v'oiver k'mo shekasav achinuch simer neishayin vav and neishayin hey. There's also another 2 prohibitions about him working. Whether he has a mum kavua means a permanent blemish, or a mum oiver. It may be passing, and when it's gone, he's back in. But while the blemish is there, while the mum is there, there's a mum kavua means it's a permanent issue. Mum oiver means it's a passing issue. It could be cured, it could be a remedy. Both of them is a prohibition that he shouldn't serve, he shouldn't do the avoid in the Beis HaMikdash, any avoid. As the Chinuch explains in Reisha and Vav 276, 275. Ubesharshei mitzvah sham kasav. The Sefer HaChinuch always looks for the root of the mitzvah. He writes, he says something which is a very practical, but also disturbing. It's difficult. Sefer HaChinuch says, I'm using my own words, it's not the real question is, what did he do? What did this man do? He was born a certain way. Yeah. Or something happened to him, an injury, or there's deformity in his body. You're penalizing him. That he can't do the avoid in the Beis HaMikdash like all the other Kohanim. It's a very painful thing. You know, in today's society, there's a special attempt, they call it inclusivity, right? We even have a law that was created a few years ago that every building needs to have accessibility to people who have physical disabilities. A parking lot, right, has a special place. You build a ramp so people can use a wheelchair, they can't use steps, etc. And we understand why. It's not their fault that they were born a certain way or that they experienced or experiencing a difficulty, a challenge. On the contrary, you want to be sensitive. So at first glance, this mitzvah seems like, oh, you have a mum, you can't do that. All the other Kohanim could, his brother could, his father could, his second brother could, and he can't. And that's a mitzvah in Parshas Emor. This is what this mitzvah is coming to address. But the Tzemach Tzedek here in this maim, in this discourse, is not just going to be, he'll be discussing this mitzvah. He'll be discussing this entire experience that this person has to deal with in life, what other people don't deal with. A mamzer is a whole other issue, yeah? A mamzer is a similar issue, on a different level. There's no physical deformity, but a mamzer did nothing wrong. Mami and Tati were engaged in an adulterous relationship, right? So a woman was married and she has a relationship with somebody else and a baby is born and she was never a divorce. The baby is a mamzer. What's his fault? It's not his fault. He's an innocent boy. There's a pasuk in Koheles, V'ro'isi duimas ha'ashukim asher ein lehem menachem. I have seen the cries of those who were deprived and they have no comment, they have no comforter. So the Medrash says that referring to Hashem is saying, this is my fault. And he's talking about the mamzer. I've seen the cries of those who were deprived and nobody can comfort them. It's my fault. I'm the one who made the law about Eish, so it's my fault that he's a mamzer. So he says, ultimately, I'm the only one who has to comfort, has to comfort the mamzer. It's an unbelievable Medrash on a pasuk in Koheles. Yeah, so that's a similar form where a person goes into a situation, yeah, and has this title, yeah, and we know what mamzer, right? There's mamzer in halach, and then there's mamzer the way it became part of the Jewish lexicon. You know, when you really like somebody, you have a good title for him, yeah? A mamzer. The truth is, the Gemara says the word mamzer is mumzar, right? It's also a form of a blemish, a different type of blemish. So this is what we're going to be addressing. It's a deep journey, it's an emotional journey, this Maimer. First is a long introduction, and in the second half he gets back to the Sinyan. So the Sefer HaChinuch, which explains things basically from a more practical, I would say, earthly perspective, what you would say Alpin Nigla, the more revealed, concrete part of Torah, explains, it's not about him, it's about us. He says it's about us. And his point is that people, and I guess we can add the word unfortunately, people have a hard time looking at things that are not pleasing to their eye. That's what it is. And he says the Torah wanted that we should look at those who are doing the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. We should eagerly look at them and gaze at them and pursue them and be engaged by them. That's what the Sefer Chinuch says. Which I should say leaves us wanting, because it's like, so let the Torah say, grow up, grow up, and just because somebody lost their hair because they have cancer, or somebody has another deformity, right? It's almost like the halacha stoops down to our inability to be able to embrace those who are physically challenged. Yeah. You're saying loy sachmait. So the Sefer HaChinuch is talking practically. He says the fact is that people are they just move, they're engaged. You see a beautiful home, you see a beautiful painting, you see a beautiful person. There is an attraction. The eye, that's what he says, the eyes are taken. And the Torah wants those who are doing the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash should have that attraction. That's the first thing the Sefer HaChinuch says. It's a very interesting explanation. Reminds me just a story when I was a kid. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to come into shul to daven mincha every day, 3:15. Everything was upstairs in 7-7. There's a small shul, and he would daven there basically almost every day with a minyan mincha. So it was a very humble and moving experience. There was a table there where the bachim would learn on a bench. So the Rebbe would come in, he would put on his gartel, they would start ashrei, and he didn't have a stender. He would just hold his siddur, stand by the table, and then by Chazaras HaShatz, after Kiddush, he would sit down and face the crowd, and always, I don't think I ever saw even one exception, he put his hand on his forehead like this, and look in the siddur, and just follow the Chaz and Chazaras HaShatz word for word, like the Halach and Shulchan Aruch. Every single day, he would sit like this, Chazaras, for decades, he would sit like this, no Chazaras HaShatz. One day, I wasn't there, but I heard he didn't put his head on his forehead. And it was a strange, he did this every day. He would sit down, he was facing the olam on a bench. He sat on there was a bench that the bachrim would use for learning. There was upstairs a bench in 7-7, and he would sit on that bench. And they would use that bench afterwards. There was no stender, there was no chair. But he would sit like this. One day, he sat down after Kedusha, he didn't put his okay, so most people, fine. I mean, there's no obligation, you don't have to put them. But he did it for so many years. The next day he did it again. The next day not. So, Bachrim are curious and eager. So they were trying to, like just to change his minig. It was enigmatic. So I heard one of them asked one of the secretaries. He didn't know. How was he supposed to know? After a while, they saw on and off. They realized. I can't say for sure this was the reason, but they realized the pattern. There was a Jew. Maybe some of you even remember. I don't know. Maybe you remember. There was a Jew he lives in Israel, and he would come to Crown Heights and to Brooklyn to collect money for tzedakah. And he was born with a terrible, terrible disformity. You remember the Jew? His whole face was blown up. It looked like he was in a fire. Shimon. The Gedenkstein. Blind, couldn't see. His cheeks were blowing up, and his whole body was not a regular body. I remember when I would walk on Kingston Avenue as a kid, and I would see him, and I was a little kid, I would cross the street. I would run away from fear, simply from fear. As a little child, you don't understand, and I would get scared. He was the kindest person in the world. Later I got older, he was the sweetest guy in the world. Today he's married, I heard, and he has children. An amazing person. But physically, it was very hard to look. They realized that whenever he was by mincha, the Rebbe didn't put his hand on the forehead. Even though that's what he did every day, but if he was in the room, he didn't put his hand on the forehead. Because I think He was afraid that somebody is going to interpret it that he doesn't want to see. When he wasn't there, he went back. Now you have to understand, he was blind, so he wouldn't see that the Rebbe's head was on the forehead. But somebody in the room could think that he doesn't want to look at him. So, but here, l'chayre, you see the opposite trend, right? The halach is stooping down and saying, okay, you don't want to look, don't look. We're not going to have him here. He's not going to come in, you don't have to look. That's one thing the Sefer Chinuch says. Then the Sefer Chinuch says something deeper. He says the physical body is a mirror of the spiritual body. Every aver, every limb, every organ, the structure and the chemistry and the composition of the human body is obviously not random. Every single limb, every organ, every bone is designed. Yeah, you see, Chazal say that the 248 positive commandments correspond to the Ramach Evarim, to 248 organs. In Zohar it says the 248 mitzvahs are organs of the king, the Evarim de Malka. It's Hashem's organs, Kavayachal. So there's a precise and meticulous meaning in the structure of the body. So that when you see the physical body, the Sefer HaChinuch says it's actually a reminder and a mirror of a whole higher, deeper structure. And that was part of seeing the Kohenim who were doing the Avodah. And therefore, if something is blemished over there, it would be missing. That's what in the observer. That's what he quotes here from the Sefer HaChinuch. You see, what is it? Sheyesh remez l'shleimus tzurasoi li'inyanim chuli. The shleimus tzurasoi, the perfect form of the Kohen, of a human being, reflected a higher reality, a higher skeletal, a higher structure. It was a form of meditation. It would teach you something. And in order that should not be lacking, so the Torah says that this Kohen should not do the Avodah. This answer, again, is lacking, of course. Because here again, who's the one who's responsible for this deformity? Ultimately, the Rebbeinu Shalom. So his body has its unique mission. So that's what he goes now. To understand the shayrish. The shayrish is the root of distancing blemished priests from the service in the temple. But now there's a paradox. They were allowed to eat all the sacred meat, even Kodesh Kadoshim. There were two types of karbanas, Kodesh Kadoshim and Kodesh Kalim. Kodesh Kalim are a more lenient holiness that could be eaten also by the owner, by the families, by poor people, by anybody, as long as it was in Yerushalayim. That's called Kodesh Kalim. Kodesh Kadoshim means the holy of holiest karbanas could only be eaten by Kohenim in the Beis HaMikdash. Couldn't be taken out to the Yerushalayim. Couldn't be eaten by anybody else. Why? Because there's a certain holiness that only Kohenim can eat. The blemish Kohenim can have an equal part in that. They can eat everything, even Kodesh Kadosh. That means their holiness is not compromised. And we understand why. They're probably more sensitive than other Kohenim. So when it comes to eating, they're like all the other Kohenim. They can eat v'hamurim and kachim kalim. And the part of kachim kalim that was lifted up and given to the Kohen, unlike the other parts that were given to the owner to eat, they can eat that too. Like the pasuk says earlier in Emor, lechem eleihav mikatshei hakadoshim min hakatshim yoichel. The same Baal Mum, when it comes to the bread of his God, from the holy of holies, from the holy he can eat. Vayikra chav alav chav beis. The pasuk continues, el hachparoiches lo yavel hamizbeach lo yigash. He can't go into the heichel, he can't go to the mizbeach, he can't do the avodah. But eating, he can eat everything, even the holiest foods that only the Kohenim can eat. The Pirish Rashi, like Rashi explains, there's a Mishnah at the beginning of the 12th chapter of Maseches Zvachim. Balei mumim, bein balei mumim kvoyim, bein balei mumim ovrim, cholkim, va'oichlim, avaloi makrivin. All Kohenim who are blemished, whether a permanent one or a passing one, are allowed to divide, be part of the division of the offerings and eat with all the other Kohenim in the Beis HaMikdash. Avaloi makrivin. But they themselves can do the service of offering the carbon, sprinkling the blood, burning it on the Mizbeach. The avodas that Kohenim did, lighting the menorah, burning the incense, all that. Was? Lighting the menorah, you're saying even though Yisrael could light the menorah. Good. Hadlaka Ksheda Bizarre, very good. Lighting the menorah, even though Yisrael could light the menorah. I stand corrected. Burning the incense. What's the question? We have a paradox. That's inside the Heichel. But he's saying, I assume he's saying, Rabbi Zaks is saying, if you get him a big torch and he stands outside and he could reach the menorah. Oh, no, because he can eat in the Beis HaMikdash. He can be. You just can't be in the Heichel. They didn't eat the karbonis in the Heichel. Good to kasha. What's the problem here? The Gemara says, part of the atonement of the one who brought the carbon is the Kohenim eating it. In other words, the eating of the carbon was a continuation to the hakrava of the carbon. There were two stages. One was offering it, and the second one was eating it. But the eating it was also part of the avodah. If he can't do the avodah for whatever reason, this blemish Kohen is not capable for whatever doing the avodah, so the eating part is also part of the avodah, and it's holy, the holiest meat. That's perfectly fine. What's this paradox? So you say, well, you want to make him feel good. You don't want to deprive him from everything. Now, sometimes a person can't do the avodah Parshas because they physically can't. Kohen breaks both of his legs. Obviously, you have to stand. So that we understand. You Parshas want to let him heal. That's not the issue. But we're talking about different mumim, blemishes, that he could do the avodah, but he still can't. But when it comes to eating, yes, perfectly fine. Even though the eating is part of the avodah. Yesh lahagdim maimer harab Shimon bar Yochai. It's coming to Lag Ba'omer. There's a teaching from Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Parshas Vayeshev Kuf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph Al Pasuk Zeh. In Zohar, Parshas Vayeshev, page 181. There's a saying, a teaching of Reb Shimon bar Yochai on this pasuk, even though it's Parshas Vayeshev, but the Zohar brings in this pasuk from Parshas Emor about the balmum, the blemish Kohen, not going into the Heichel and not doing the avodah. And he says, "V'zel l'shaynai," and this is the language of this is the quote of the Zohar. There's now going to be a long quote. It's going to be classically a Zoharic, which means Kabbalistic quote, and the whole Maim is going to be explaining this quote of the Zohar. V'zel l'shaynai. Tochazi, come and see. Tochazi, not Talmud Chacham, but Tochazi, come and see. In Gemara, the expression is Toshma. In Zohar, it's Tochazi. In Gemara, it's come and hear. In Zohar, it's come and see. Because the difference between Nigla the Torah and Pnimi Yisatayr is the difference between hearing and seeing. So in Gemara, it's always Toshma, and in Zohar, it's always Tochazi, come and see. Bahu Shaita, during that time, Dahu Nahar Nagid V'Nafik, at that time, when the river, Nagid V'Nafik, it flows and comes out, Afik Kol Inu Nishmasen. All types of souls, all the souls come out together with the river that flows. Pasuk says, V'Nahar Yotzim E'edin Lahashkas Hagan. The river, Bereshis, the river comes out of Eden to irrigate the garden. The river that flows, the souls come out with the river. Ve'isabadas nukva. Kulhu kayamin legoy bekurta delegov besite kurta. As the nukva means feminine, the nekeva, becomes pregnant with all these souls, so they all exist, legav bekurta, the legav besite kurta. What does this mean? It says it's pirush, betoich pnimiyus yesoid va'ateres yesoid de malchus. The souls exist within the pnimiyus, within the internal space of a Kabbalistic level, which is going to be explained, called Yisoid, and the crown of Yisoid of Malchus, Shenikras Tzion v'Yerushalayim. So the souls exist inside something we call Pnimius Yisoid. In the body, the different limbs correspond to the different divine spheres. It says in Zohar, right, Chachma Bina Das are in the brain, in the mind, in the head, different parts of the brain. Chachma Bina Das, you have the right brain, you have the left brain. The right brain is Chachma, the left brain is Bina. You have Das, this is the center. Chesed is the right arm, Gvura is the left arm, Tiferes is the torso, Netzach and Hoira, the two thighs and legs. Yisoid is the bris, the procreative organ from which ultimately all creation happens, through which we create new souls. That's called Yisoid. Spheres HaYisoid, Midas HaYisoid. It says Yisoid is the Ois Bris Kodesh. It's the tool of bonding, of intimacy, of connection. That's Yisoid. And then you have Malchus. Malchus is the one you bond with, which is the feminine, the spouse. So Yisoid is the bris, which connects with Malchus, which is the intimacy with Malchus, which is the femininity. Sometimes Malchus is also associated with the mouth, which is also communicative. It allows us to connect to other people because thoughts are still inside and speech begins. Speech begins communication. So he says all the souls exist in the pnimius of Yisoid and in the crown of Yisoid, of Malchus. It's called Tzion Yerushalayim. L'kach kafa l'shoyne bekurta de legav besite kurta. And those are the two languages in the Zohar there. Now the Zohar continues. V'katsi harayis pagim. When the moon became blemished, referring to the story that happened in creation. It says Hashem created the two great luminaries, Shnei Moris HaGdolim. Later, he calls the sun Moir HaGadol, the great luminary, and the moon Moir HaKatan, the small luminary. So the Gemara in Chul and Daf Samach tells the famous story that really the sun and the moon were identical. And then the moon started to complain, you can't have two kings wearing the same crown. There's only one king wearing one crown, right? England is not going to coronate on Shabbos. Two kings with two crowns, with one crown, doesn't work. The crown either goes on you or on me. So the moon says, who has the crown? So Hashem says, you're right, go diminish yourself. And that's when the moon changed from Moira Gadol to Moira Katan. That's what the Chazal said. So in the beginning it says Hashem created two great luminaries. Later the name changes because the moon went through a whole transformation, and this is called B'gam HaLavana, the blemish of the moon. What do we mean the blemish of the moon? The sun doesn't do what the moon does. The sun doesn't have the issues of the moon. The sun has a stability and a consistency. The moon, from our perspective, it waxes, it wanes, it disappears, it's reborn, it waxes again, it reaches the wholesome moment on the 15th night of the month usually, and then it right away begins to diminish itself and becomes smaller and smaller from our perspective until completely invisible and rebirth. And this is essential to the systems of astronomy. It's not because it's a bad weather outside. You remember we learned Maseches Rosh Hashanah. It's not because it's a bad weather. Sometimes a bad weather, you don't see the sun either. It's foggy, it's rainy, so it's not so light. But that's only because of the clouds. This is essential to the system of the moon. This is called B'gam HaLavana, the blemish of the moon. The moon also doesn't have its own light. The moon is a reflection of the light of the sun. As the Zohar says there in Parshas Vayeshev, Leis Lam Migar Maklum, the moon doesn't have anything of its own light. So the Zohar says, Rabbi says, when the moon got blemished, Ba'hu Sitra de Chivya Bisha, in that side or that element of the Chivya, Chivya is a snake, Bisha is negativity, like Pusha, Bisha. It's in Aramaic, it's like negative. But Chivya Bisha, in the negativity of the snake, the moon got blemished. In the negativity of the snake, Kedain, what happened? Kol inu nishmas in the nafkin, all the souls that came out, Afal gav de kulhu dachyan, even though they're all pure, Tahir in Aramaic is dachya, pure, v'kulu kaddish, and they're all holy, hoyel v'navgu b'bgimu, because they came out from the blemished moon, b'chol inun asar, the matu inun ishmasen, in any space where these souls arrived, kulu izbiru, they all broke, v'izbegimu, and they became blemished, b'kama tsa'arin, with various forms of anguish, b'kama ka'evin, with various forms of pain, ka'ev, Ve'ilein inun de isru bukutchabrichu. And these are the souls that God has a special desire for, a special love to. Isru in Aramaic is ratzon. Ru'usa de liba is ratzon alev. Isru is a special ratzon, there's a special love and sensitivity to these souls. Chuli, etc. Raza de Mila, the Zohar says, the secret of this idea is as follows. Sharyan kegavna de la'ela. These souls are a mirror of the higher reality. Gufa ispigim. The body of the soul may be blemished, but v'nishmasa, the soul, is essentially wholesome. Pirush. Kashem shalamayla en yinikas achitzonim rak mehakelim v'loy nishmas hapartzufim kach lamata gufa levad ispagim v'loy nishmas. Just like by Hashem, the only place from where the externals, the chitzonim, the klippas, can get their nurture is only from the vessels, not from the souls of the vessels, not from the oiris, only from the kelim. The oiris are called nishmas hapartzufim, the souls in the partzufim. The partzufim are the structures of the spheres. Partzuf means a face. So only from the vessel, not from the oir. And the vessel is a metaphor for the body. And the light is a metaphor for the soul. Soul and body come from oir and keli. The body is a keli for the neshama. It's a container for the soul. Just like by Hashem, every keli is a container for light. So just like above, the chitzonim, the external forces, could only get their nurture from where? From the vessels, not from the light. So down here also, the blemish can only be in the body, not in the soul. And in v'loy nishmasa, gufa levad ispagim v'loy nishmasa. So he says, v'nishmasa legoy kegavna de la'ela v'da kegavna de da. The soul and the body are a mirror of the soul and the body above. Ubegin kach, and because of this, ilain inun, these are the souls, the boyin lechadesuse bechadesuse de sierra, who need to be able to rejoice with the joy of the moon. Whenever the moon experiences joy, these are the souls that experience that joy together with the moon, because they went through the whole process of the moon. This is a quote from the Zohar, Parshas Vayeshev, with some of the commentary of the Mikdash Melech, a commentary on the Zohar. Oh, that's the question. What does this all mean? What does all of this mean? So the Zohar said, this is a classic line in the Zohar, it's mystical, it's difficult to understand, that somehow with a river came out souls, but the moon was blemished, and that affected a certain amount of souls. They went through the same process, and they came out also with a blemish. Even though they're all pure, and they're all holy, don't think they're not pure and holy. The blemish has nothing to do with their holiness. But wherever they arrive, they're experiencing different pains and different aches and different forms of anguish. And they reflect the system above, where the soul always is pure, but the container can seem blemished, and that's what their neshamas reflect as well. And there's a special love to these souls. And when the moon rejoices, these are the souls that rejoice with the moon. What does all this mean? So this is a statement of Shimon ben Yochai. It's very mystical words. So this Maimer, Derech explains this piece from the Zohar. Ulahavinza, to understand this. First we have to explain what's the blemish of the moon. Based on this is dependent, and this is the source of the begima, of the blemish, of the body of the soul. The soul itself has two parts, the soul of the soul and the body of the soul. The moon diminishes, becomes diminished, it wanes the second half of each month. At the end of the month, she's completely invisible. Then and then she experiences rebirth, and that's what we call the moilad. Moilad means birth, the birth of the moon. Why is it called the birth of the moon? Because it's as though the moon is now reborn. Parshas from a physical, astronomical perspective, the moon receives its light from the sun. So therefore, when we look at the moon, what we're seeing is the light of the sun that reaches the moon and is reflected off the moon. The light itself is a substance, the moon itself is something that doesn't emit light, but it can reflect the light of the sun. So it's always based on its position vis-a-vis the sun. So it's very vulnerable. The sun is self-contained. It emits its own light. The moon is dependent on the connection with the sun. That makes it vulnerable. What happens at the end of the month? The moon actually gets, so to speak, closer to the sun, to the point that the half of the moon is a ball, so only half of it reflects the light of the sun. So that half is facing the sun away from the earth. So when we look at the moon, we don't see anything. Right? So if this would be if this would be the sun, and the moon would be facing the sun, right? Right here, and the earth is here. The earth is here. Right? So we look at the moon, what do we see? We just see darkness, because the entire side of the moon that's present facing the sun and bright is completely turned away from us. This is known as the moment of the moiled. This is rebirth. It's called in Kabbalah Yichud Shimsha V'Siyara, the intimacy of the sun and the moon. What happens afterwards? The moon starts moving away. So a day later, or 2 days later, 3 days later, we could see a little tiny, what is it called? Crescent. Why is it a little crescent? Because most of the moon is still facing the sun. But there's a little bit of the moon that turned away because it starts moving, so that's what we see. The further it gets away, the more we see. And now you come to the 15th day of the month. What happens? Now the earth is in the middle, the sun is here. So the part of the moon we see, the half of the moon, it's completely lit up with the light of the sun. Now it's the furthest away from the sun. That's when it shines the most. Now it gets closer to the sun. That's called the second half of the month. So the light diminishes. Now it's mamish getting close to the sun, azay, right? Until it completely disappears. You don't see it. And the moment of the moiled, what we call the moiled, rebirth, you don't see. Then the moon continues after the rebirth, and when the witnesses can see and notice the moon the first time, that's when they testified, and they called it Rish Chodesh. That's Pashut from an astronomical perspective, and every month. This is a process that takes 29 and a half days. The moon completes its orbit, 29 and a half days, no exception. 29 days, 12 hours, and Tafshin Sada Gimel Chalakim, 793 parts. We divide an hour into 1,080 parts. It's much better than 60 minutes. Mathematically, 1,080 is a very good number to work with in mathematics because of its flexibility for division. So an hour, when they announce the Moiled wird sein Dinstig, yeah. Everybody knows that, right? The announcement. The Moiled wird sein Dinstig, Firazeger, right? Mit 2 Minuten, mit 18 Chalakim. That doesn't show up on the phone. No, so let's say it's 4:02, right? It's not 4:03, but it's 4:02 and 18 parts, because every hour has 1,080 parts. So it's more precise. We'll do 4:02 and 10 seconds, right? So it's not a chelik is not a second. So this is called the blemish of the moon. It goes through this process, which the sun also has its changes. We have changes of seasons. That's because of the orbit. The solar orbit is not a straight circle. It's on an angle, 23 degrees or something. So therefore, right, how much heat we get from the sun changes in the summer, in the spring, in the autumn, in the fall, winter, spring, summer, all the seasons. Because yes, there's changes also, but the changes in the sun are completely not like this. It's not called pogum. The Levana is called pogum. It doesn't have its own light, and it goes through these processes where it disappears. Which of course we understand on an emotional level, it represents something completely different than the sun. In fact, in English, when you want to say, you say a lunatic. What's a lunatic? Anybody knows? Right? I'm having a lunar moment. Yeah, lunacy. Lunar is the moon. Why do we compare a lunatic to the moon? What do you want from the moon? The answer is because of the lack of stability. The Gemara also says, it says in Barchi Nafshi, Shemesh Yada Mevoyah. The sun knows its path. So the Gemara, Yareyach Lo Yada Mevoyah. The moon doesn't know what he's doing. The reason is, the orbit of the sun is a very predictable orbit, the way you see it. The moon is a very complex orbit, so it looks like he doesn't know where he's going. He needs Waze, and even Waze doesn't help. The orbit of the moon is a very complicated orbit. It's like these cyclones, these roller coasters in the Six Flags. It's very complicated, the tracks. It looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. So in Mela, it's a whole different type. The moon represents the vulnerability, the loss, the diminishment. That's what he says. When it's reborn, you celebrate Rosh Chodesh, a new month, umakrivim karban musaf. And there was a special carbon that used to be makriv called a musaf. It continues to grow. Half of the month it's full. And then again, the same cycle. It diminishes, it's concealed, and then uli valed, and then reborn, uli is gadol, and growing again. Every month, there's no exception to this. Disappears, which is like a form of death, so to speak. Rebirth, growing again, reaching fullness, and you want it to stay there. No, again, diminishment. All because Hashem told the moon, go diminish yourself. The Gemara there tells the story with the moon, how it complained, and Hashem said, go diminish yourself. And the Gemara continues there and says that the moon got very upset. The moon told Hashem, just because I said something logical, I have to diminish myself. I'm the one who said two people can't wear the same crown. It doesn't work that way. Right? They'll kill each other. What do they say? You can't have two chefs running the kitchen. You can't have two teachers running a classroom. You can't. You want to know how we have two parents? Because they're supposed to be one. They're supposed to be one. Einenu shemeya b'koilenu, right? The Gemara says a ben Sayer Umayra is only if the voice of the father and mother are identical. Because if they have two separate voices, you can't call him a ben Sayer Umayra. The house is a fragmented house. He's not a ben Sayer Umayra. They have to have one voice. So the Levana says, I told you something logical. Two kings can't wear the same crown. Either Yankel is the son or I'm the son. We can't both be the son. So Hashem said, you're right, go diminish yourself. The Gemara says, B'shvil shamarti davar hagum, because I spoke logic, therefore I should diminish myself. So Hashem started to comfort the moon and said that all the tzaddikim are going to be called by the moon. They're all going to be called small. Yaakov hu akatan, David hu akatan. They're like the moon. The moon wasn't happy. Yeshikoyach, I don't need that. So he said that the Jews are going to make the calendar based on you. All their months are going to be based on you, not based on the sun. The Romans have a solar calendar. We have a lunar calendar. The moon wasn't happy. Yeshikoyach, go give it. I don't want to lose myself. So and Hashem tried and tried all the milas of the moon, and nothing worked. So finally Hashem said, Haviyu alai kapara shemiyatati asayirech. Bring an atonement for me because of what I did. I diminished the moon. After comforting the moon wasn't comforted. He said at the end, I'm to blame. And that's where Rosh Chodesh, we brought a special offering, and it's the only offering where it says, it was a goat, it says, La Hashem chatos, God's sin. What's the sin of God? Diminishing the moon. Now the story is a very strange story. If you're really so upset about what you did, you know you have an opportunity to change it. No, if your name is God, you could probably bring it back. You destroy the moon, he complains, you try to comfort it, he says, I'm not interested. So you said, you know what, I'm going to bring an atonement every month. Maybe you tried it, like somebody once said, my man macht me krank, danach schickt er mit zu the best of the Kteidim. My husband makes me sick and then he sends me to the best doctor. Don't make me sick, you don't have to send me to the best doctor. There was a kid, he killed his parents, right? When he came to the judge, the judge said, what do? You deserve death penalty. He says, Hab rachmanis, ich bin hayasam. A little compassion for an orphan. I don't understand. You do it. Bring an atonement for me. Well, you can fix it. So obviously there's something very deep going on here. And what does it even mean? Bring an atonement for Hashem. What is an atonement? Atonement means I hurt you. So I want to apologize. I want atonement. I want forgiveness. I say I'm sorry. So you say a Jew needs a kapara because he betrayed Hashem's will. Whose will did Hashem betray? His own? If he diminished the moon, he wanted to do it. So he did an Aveda? Against whom is the Aveda? Against himself? He wanted to do it. So that was Ratzon Hashem. So beautiful. So it's a mitzvah. So God should say, I did a mitzvah. I did my will. Somebody forced him to do it, then now he has to atone. It's a very, very deep secret, obviously. But this is the carbon of the Chodesh. So this is the secret of Gimas Halavana. There's something in the blemish of the moon that is somehow essential to the whole story of existence. And that's the secret of the Zohar, that it has to do with the journey of souls. Different souls that are connected specifically to the moon and different souls that are connected specifically to the sun. And these souls have a completely different journey, a completely different experience. And every month they go through this cycle. And it's not an easy cycle, to the point that at the end Hashem says, I need to atone for myself. I need to atone for myself for diminishing the moon. Ultimately, this process was set in motion by me. If the moon would not be diminished, there would be no night. Huh? The definition of night would be different. Elie Wiesel's first book is called Night. It's about Auschwitz, right? You ever read it? The definition of night would be very different. They say that Shmuel Munkus was a chassid of the Balatanya. He was a very deep soul. He was also very funny. He had a gewaldige sense of humor. You know, humor goes two ways. There's a joking type of dismissive humor, that's litzonis. But there's humor that's really very deep. You know, it touches places that you can't express it through regular words. You express it through jest. Like Milsa de B'dichese. Hano tre batche. So, it says that he came to Shmuel Munkus. There's a story when he came to the Balatanya the first time. He arrived in Liozna. He lived in Liozna. Liozna is Belarus, was called White Russia at the time. In the middle of the night, so he didn't know where the Balatanya lived. You know, there were no signs, so there was no music coming out of the house. So he looked for a house where there was light, and he saw there was one house that was light. So he knocked on the door, and the Alter Rebbe himself was sitting and learning. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he opened the door for Reb Shmuel Munkus. So Reb Shmuel Munkus says, Shalom Aleichem. Aleichem Shalom. Munkus says, Ich ken da Einstein. They never met before. Can I stay here? So he says, Was kommst du mit Nacht? What do you come now, middle of the night? So he says, Und ich hab gemeint, as bei Rebbe in der Stacke Nacht. And I thought that by you there's no night. That's what I thought. It says Laila Kayom Yoyer, right? By Yitzis name it says Laila Kayom Yoyer. The night is like the Kakashecha Kaira. So the Alter Rebbe says, I don't think this house is for you. I could find you another house where you could stay. So he says, Ich will einstehen da. So he says, what do you have to stay? He says, Sinishken Yiddische Stub. This is not a Jewish house. I want to stay. He said, I think another house would be better for you. He says, I want to stay here. So they got into like this little debate. So finally the Alter Rebbe says, Ich will rufen de Goy, whenever did Aroistreiben. I'll call the Gentile and he'll expel you. So Shmuel Munkus started to cry and he said, Rebbe, mein Goy is a sach starke wie Eier Goy. my guy is a lot stronger than your guy. And that was the beginning of a very profound relationship. So obviously the exchange wasn't just a physical exchange. When he said, I thought by the Rebbe there's nishtake nacht, so the Alter Rebbe felt that this is not a place for him. Why? Because if you're coming in order because you don't want to have night anymore, you don't want to deal with any darkness, so ultimately it's not the derech of the Balatanya of transformation. So he said there's other houses. He says he wants this house. So he says what's going to happen is the guy is going to come and throw you out. You're going to fall because you're coming here to fly to the heavens. Once you wake up and you become sober, you finish your spiritual trip, you're going to be out. And it's going to be worse than before. So he tells the Alter Rebbe, my guy is a lot stronger than your guy. I know about it. I'm not coming here from a place of denial. I'm coming here from a place of knowledge and awareness. It's stronger than yours. I know how strong. So the Alter Rebbe says, so now come in. I'll call upon him. So night can have different definitions. So if the moon wasn't blemished, there would be a whole different type of night. The Iyar, Voiker that we have today, night and day, would be different. Obviously, if this was the design, right? What do you need an atonement? Why do you need an atonement? Number one, if the moon is just like the sun, there would be no night. And for nature we need night, right? Because if you'd have the sun 24 hours a day, what would happen? First of all, we wouldn't know how to sleep, and also all the vegetation would be scorched. It wouldn't be able to survive. Just like you need summer and winter, it's all essential to nature. Was? Well, it looks like it was all the same day. And then there's another question. The Chald's dinstik mit mitvach, you're telling about... And then there's another question. If this is the design, so why did Hashem wait for the moon to complain? So create the sun one way and the moon another way and everything is good. No, he had to create them equally. And then the moon complained and then he diminished. So now the moon got upset. And now he says, atone for what I did. It was a mistake or wasn't a mistake? If it was a mistake, doesn't mean God makes mistakes. If it wasn't a mistake and it was the plan, so would you have to wait for the moon to complain? So of course it's metaphoric. Everything is metaphoric. That's the point. The physical moon is also a metaphor. So it was metaphoric. The physical realities in astronomy are a manifestation of the metaphor. Yep. Torah is called Mishal HaKadmoini, Mashal HaKadmoini. Yeah. But it's not just a lesson in the books. The fabric of creation teaches the lesson. It's the design of creation. So what does this mean? So from here, he goes now away from the astronomy to the metaphor. In other words, it's all a spiritual metaphor that's then manifested in the physical. When we say metaphor, it doesn't mean that it's not in the physical sense. It means the physical begins on a spiritual. The whole story of the sun and the moon is a spiritual story. And then it descends and is manifested. By the way, this explains also another very interesting thing. We have a din in this week's Parshas Emor of Kiddush HaChodesh. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Atem, Atem, Atem. It says 3 times that you, Bezdin, should establish the new month. Atem, afilu shoygegin, atem afilu mezidin, atem afilu mutayin or anusim. Even if you make a mistake, you make the wrong calculations, or even if you willingly made a mistake, you willingly manipulated things because you thought it was the right thing to do. and you made Rosh Chodesh on the wrong day, it's Rosh Chodesh. There's a story there that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua had an argument when Rosh Chodesh was. Rabbi Yeshua was the greatest astronomer, and he told Rabbi Gamliel he's wrong. And Rabbi Gamliel said, I'm telling you to come here on Yom Kippur. On your Yom Kippur, I want you to come with your stick and with your money and with your pouch. For Rabbi Yeshua, that would be a desecration of Yom Kippur. Rabbi Gamliel believed Yom Kippur is a different day because Rosh Chodesh was a different day. So Rabbi Yeshua started to cry. And Rabbi Akiva told him, Atem afilu shoygigin, atem afilu mezidin. The Torah says that when Bezdin makes Rosh Chodesh, it's Rosh Chodesh, even if they're making a mistake. So Rabbi Yeshua kissed Rabbi Akiva, and he said, you're my student, but you're my Rebbe in wisdom, and he went on Yom Kippur, because Rabbi Akiva told him that even though astronomically it's not Rosh Chodesh, so therefore Yom Kippur is on a different day. And the day that he's coming to Rabbi Gamliel with his money is really Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Gamliel made a mistake, it's not a problem. The question is this a joke? If Rosh Chodesh is a fact, so Bezdin said, it's a difficult thing to understand. Rosh Chodesh is a real celebration, right? If it's a real celebration, so you need that day. The moon is not changing because Bezdin l'chayda. Chassidus explains something very deep. The celebration of the birth of the new moon is a spiritual celebration. There's the moon physical and there's the moon spiritual. Usually, when the moon is reborn, the spiritual moon is reborn. And that's the celebration of Rosh Chodesh. How do we know when the spiritual moon is reborn? We don't know. The answer is we look at the physical moon. The physical moon cycles represent the spiritual moon cycles, because the physical is a mirror for the spiritual. When Bezdin, which is a real Bezdin, I'm not talking about corrupt Bezdin. If it's a corrupt Bezdin, if it's a real Bezdin, a Sanhedrin, Al Pi Torah, that was ordained man to man to man, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and they established Rosh Chodesh on a different day, means that the spiritual birth of the moon is actually on that day. There's a lack of alignment in the world between the physical and the spiritual. And because of lack of alignment, so if it's on a physical level it's on one day, on a spiritual level it's on another day. That's the Vart. Because the real celebration of Rosh Chodesh is not just the physical moon was reborn, that too, but it's the spiritual moon was reborn. Because it's really a metaphor. Most times it's perfectly aligned, but there's times it's not aligned on the spiritual, just like in a person's life, right? Sometimes the body is aligned with your emotions and sometimes not. Sometimes your body reflects what's happening inside, and sometimes there's disconnect. The body is doing its thing, and emotionally I'm not connected. Like it's a disassociation. There's a lack of alignment between the two. The person's physical is not expressing fully his or her inner life. That's the mashal. So let's now begin a few minutes. We'll learn another few minutes that starts the explanation. V'yadua, the second line on top. You see 62, v'yadua. V'yadua, it's known, shaha'inyin reimez l'mayla b'midas malchusi yizbarach. The whole story of the moon represents something, remez, it intimates the midah of Hashem's malchus, midas malchusi yizbarach. The moon is always a metaphor for malchus. Levana is malchus, feminine. Which is why, as we will see, as it says in Svarim, that the biological cycle of the woman reflects the moon. It's fascinating. 2 weeks and 2 weeks. The moon is reborn, it waxes. There's a whole mimer from the Alter Rebbe about this. It waxes for 2 weeks. It reaches its full glory. You think the moon is going to stay that way. Then it starts getting diminished, also for 2 weeks. So it says in Svarim, in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that the cycle of Nida, of the woman, of femininity, is reflective of that cycle. There's the process of the blood, and then the cleansing, which is approximately a week or 2 weeks. And then there's the mikveh, and then there's intimacy, and there's like a rebirth, so to speak, in a relationship. And it goes for 2 weeks, and then again this process. Because Levana is associated with Midas HaMalchus, which is femininity. What do we mean by Midas Malchus? Hamachaya Olam is Bri Yitzir Asiyah. The Midah of Hashem's Malchus, the attribute of Malchus, which is royalty, leadership, kingship, gives life to the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah. We speak about the four worlds, the highest world, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah, intimacy, creation, formation, action. The lowest sphere of Atzilus, which is Malchus, is what becomes the life force of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiyah. Sheyoredis Kain. She descends, al derech zeh, just like it's physically. The moon gets diminished. The Malchus goes down in the same system of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. U'b'Rosh Chodesh noiledas. And on Rosh Chodesh, Malchus is reborn. V'nasis nekuda tachas yisoid. Nun Sof Yud is nekuda tachas yisoid. The quality above Malchus, the sphere, the charisma above Malchus is called yisoid. As I said, yisoid is the bris, which connects with Malchus, which is femininity. So Malchus goes on a journey into Bri Yitzir Asiyah. But on Rosh Chodesh, it becomes a nekuda. It becomes a seminal point, tachas yisoid, right under yisoid, which means connected, aligned, parallel to yisoid, which is the bonding of the masculine and the feminine, the sun and the moon. V'oilus lekabel me'oid hachama shefa midosav yizbarach ha'miyuchades v'matzilin ein sof baruch. The moon now goes up to receive from the sun, the spiritual sun, the flow of Hashem's midos, which are completely one with Ma'atzilon, the one who emanated these midas, which is the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the infinite one, blessed be He. You understand the Oisis here? Hashem is Ein Sof, infinite. He emanated from himself what's called midos, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yesod. That's called Ma'atzil, Lahatzil Samchuyot in Hebrew, conferring authority, Ma'atzil. He emanated from himself the midas. That's all the sun. Malchus is the quality of Hashem that goes down to give life to all the worlds. But once a month, it got to come back. It got to come back to the source, to the sun, to receive the whole flow of the midos, which are one with Hashem, and that's the unity between the sun and the moon, and that's the celebration of Rosh Chodesh. And then the moon has to go on its journey again. Bye-bye, see you later. And the moon goes on a journey. It got the energy, it got this light, and now in this journey, the light fluctuates. Sometimes the light is greater, the light is smaller, until it's diminished, and then invisible, and then there's again this process. It became invisible to us because it's receiving the greatest energy from the sun. It's facing the sun away from the earth, and then it continues. So the physical cycle is just a reflection of a spiritual idea. Yerida Hazois, this whole descent of the moon of Malchus, who kedei levarer birurei nitzutzim shenoflu b'shviras hakelim mizayin malchin detoyu shehoyu b'bchinas yesh. This descent is in order to sublimate, to be mevarer, the sparks, the divine sparks that fell in a process known as Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels from the 7 kings of Toyu, of chaos, which were all in a state of yesh, of egotism, the egoic kings, as it says in Vayishlach, that there are the kings of Edom that existed before there was a king for the Jewish people. And he mentions over there 8 kings, and the first 7, it says Vayimlach, Vayamos, each one reigned and died. And this is known as the 7 kings of Olam HaToyu, the 7 kings, the seven midos of Olam HaToyu, of the world of chaos, where there was a breaking, a death, and Shviras HaKelim, the vessels broke, and the sparks in those vessels fell down and were scattered and dispersed, and went through a tremendous descent and transformation. Ki hamalucha roimez al izgalus hamida. When you say each one was a king, you say, who died and made him king? Malucha represents when a midah is fully revealed. Liyos yesh v'davar murgish. When it becomes something that's really self-conscious, you truly feel it. I can be wise and I can be conscious of my wisdom. I can be kind and I can be conscious of my kindness. I can be happy and I can be self-conscious of my happiness. That's when the midah becomes a yesh. I'm suddenly talking about it, experiencing it as a conscious thing. That's the malchus of it. It becomes like a melech. And from this there was death. From this came all the sitra achra. What's sitra achra? The other side, not holiness. Shehem pchinas haklippus, which are all the husks. Shehem yesh gomer, which ultimately become a full, separate, egotistical reality. Loimar, to say, like Paroi liya oidi, the river is mine. The point is, the challenge of Toya was the challenge known as Yeshus. What does Yeshus mean? Yeshus means, instead of being one with the experience, I'm busy trying to experience the experience, which means I'm already separate from it. Just like physically in a person, when your body is in good shape, you don't feel it. You know, you have a good workout, you're in good shape, your body is light, you don't feel it. If you start feeling your pinky, what does it mean? What does it mean? It hurts. There's a scratch, there's an infection, chas v'shalom, there's a cut. You start feeling your head, what does it mean? You have a headache, you have a migraine. If you start feeling yourself, you're lethargic, you're heavy, you're exhausted, right? When you're in the healthiest space, you don't feel. You don't feel it. Why? Because a healthy body is completely aligned with its life force. So it's a conduit. When it's a conduit, it just is. It's in the space of dveikus, of oneness. The moment there is illness, there's a separation between the body and its life force, you start feeling it. It starts experiencing itself as separate because it's separate now, and that means a lack of health. Now, this is very deep in a person's life. When I'm in the zone, when I'm in the flow, I don't feel myself. Not because I don't exist, but because my eye is in the healthiest space. It's aligned with the source of life. Whenever you're aligned, you understand what I'm saying? No? You have to experience it. Talking about it is a problem because we're talking about it. Dveikus, yeah. The feeling whenever a midah is in its most natural state, it's not murgish. There's no narrator telling me what it is, what it's not. I have a headache, I don't have a headache, I'm happy, I'm not happy, I'm miserable, I'm not miserable, I'm kind, I'm not kind. That's always when there's a certain separateness. In complete dveikus, you could see it sometimes in a child, right, who's experiencing real attachment. There's a blissfulness. You go over to the child and say, "Are you having fun? Leave me alone." Are you happy? Leave me alone. We go, am I happy? I'm not happy. I'm having fun. I'm not having fun. I'm boring. I'm not bored. I'm bored. I'm not bored. Even think, if you're sitting at a shir, or you're sitting at a concert, beautiful, beautiful concert, and you're asking yourself, do you like it or not? What does it mean? It means you're not present. If you're really there, if I'm really there, I'm not thinking, do I like it? Don't I like it? Am I feeling good about it? I'm not feeling good about it. When I'm a little detached from it, or very detached from it, now suddenly words take over. Now suddenly feelings take over of judging it, of analyzing it. That's called hisgalus hamidah. Hisgalus hamidah here doesn't mean that you're emotional. It means that the midah is revealed. It becomes a tangible, concrete experience of yeshus, divorced from the oneness itself. This is what happened in Olam HaToyu. Vayimloich, and therefore vayamas. From here came the whole reality of klippa. What's klippa? Klippa means a cover-up, a shell, a husk, a blockage. It means I'm blocked. I'm covered over. What's pshat I'm covered over? Whenever there's a klippa, there's a blockage over me, I'm not in touch with the source. Because there's a blockage. I don't have access. You say I'm blocked. The idea of klippa is the yesh. The beginning of all blockages is yeshus. Why? Because what does yeshus mean? You're not in the flow. You're not one with the source. When I'm one with the source, there's no egoic mind that's busy being self-conscious. So the vayimloich of olam hatoyu, where every midah reached a place of yeshus, caused vayamos, which is the whole concept of spiritual death, of klipa and sitra achara, which is divorced from the source of life. Does any of this resonate with anybody? Or it's too abstract? Huh? Yeah, you have to experience it to understand it. And our lives, this is much of the struggle of our lives. Am I in dvekus? Am I in complete oneness? And then there's no self-consciousness. Or I'm out of that and I'm struggling. Now one doesn't snap their fingers and eliminate yeshus, but the awareness of that is already extremely valuable. The awareness of it. When you're sitting on the floor or playing with a child, right? They need full attentiveness. Full attentiveness means I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm attentive. The moment I'm thinking about that, I'm not there anymore. I'm not present. I'm not full. So his galus, the consciousness of something, means that it actually is already disconnected. Some of us, we live life, there's a narrator in my brain telling me about things. Instead of being the experience, I'm talking about the experience. It's like a guy who goes on vacation, right, and is always with a video camera. I once read a poem, somebody who went on vacation. He went on a boat, he was on a river, whatever, and he was with a video camera because he wanted to have memories of the vacation when he comes home. So whatever he did, he was with a video camera. And then he says, after 2 weeks, I realized my video camera was on vacation, not me. He didn't allow himself the experience because he was worried what's going to be after. So he was videoing every experience. My video camera enjoyed the vacation. I didn't. I once heard somebody saying goodbye to his wife. She was going to Florida for a few days. He says, do me a favor. Don't feel the pressure to relax. You don't have to feel pressure to relax. It's fine. I'm now going to relax. So whenever any midah, any experience comes out as malchus, which means it's displayed, it's manifested, it's already shenish das. I remember somebody once asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, wie filter sich? In Yiddish, wie filter sich means how you feeling yourself. So he says, as me filled sich is shenish gut. As me filled sich is shenish gut. If you're feeling yourself, it's because there's something off. So emotionally, it's also that way. Psychologically, it's also that way. To be able to go out of the mind, to be able to go out of speculation. That's why it's so important not to live in the brain 24 hours a day. It's hard for us Jews because we're taught to use the brain. But the brain is only one tool in life. It's not all of life. Nobody ever thought that you can experience cake through your mind. MS? Nobody says a piece of cake. How am I going to experience the cake? I'll think about it. That's not how I experience cake. You need your taste buds. So why do we think that we can experience most of life through our brain? The brain is made to understand logical ideas. If you have to understand, that's a very good thing. But most of life you can't experience through the brain. We think the brain is a compensation. It's not. It's a distraction of experience. Life is experienced in experience, in oneness, in intimacy, in dvekus. The brain can be a gewaldige tool, but it becomes a substitute for experience. And there's a sense of separateness. Any of this makes sense? Huh? Yeah, verstehst? This is the source of all klipa. It's not yet klipa, it's the source. Vayimloich and then vayamos. All klipa is there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect. It's very, very powerful, this. It doesn't begin with klipa, it begins with yeshus of toyu. But the challenge is, that's where all the divine sparks are. In other words, that's where life is happening. Can I live a life without self-consciousness? Can I really live that life? We live in a world where this becomes part of reality. I don't stay my whole life as a 2-year-old in a sandbox, just experiencing the joy of life. That's the journey of Malchus. The journey of Malchus is the journey of finding the divine within all the broken vessels of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. That's the journey of Malchus. That's what he's going to continue to explain. When you say Malchus goes down, it's a metaphor for everyone's journey. To be able to reclaim oneness from a very self-conscious, egoic mind. From a mind that does live in the ego. And in the ego it experiences a lot of things. And the first thing it experiences is its separateness. That's the definition of ego. Definition of ego, we're not talking about a healthy ego here, we're talking about an unhealthy ego. The definition of the ego is separateness. In Lashon Chassidus it's called yesh. Yesh means it exists. Existence is a good thing. It's a good thing when it's connected to the real existence. When it's separate from real existence, therefore it has to become something because it's looking to compensate for oxygen that it doesn't have. Because it's not aligned. This is called Hisgalus Hamida. Every midah, when it comes into Hisgalus, it becomes self-conscious and felt. Now it starts experiencing the heaviness of gravity. The heaviness of gravity exists in the physical world, right? Light is not so subjected to the laws of gravity. The more physical, spiritually, what does that mean? The more chumrius, the more heavy. Suddenly you feel the heaviness of my personality, the heaviness of my life. When I'm light, I fly 186,000 miles per second. Even faster. Spiritual light is even faster. But the less light, the more heaviness, the more the power of gravity is pulling it down. It's the kovid, Mashiach. That's the beginning of the yesh. Vayimloich, and then is vayamos. From there comes all klippas and sitra achra. Because what's klippas and sitra achra? Klippas and sitra achra means everything that's blocked from being one with the source, and there's a sense of separateness. Now this is a very internal process. It's not I snap my fingers, okay, I'm not self-conscious. If you do that, you become more self-conscious. It's a very, very internal healing process of being in a relationship. In a relationship.
It's a monthly journey.
It's a monthly journey. Yeah. And it's all about authenticity. It's all about the realness of it. It's the real connection. The child is really there. You know, you sit down with a child and what do we have to play in the sandbox? What do we have to play with your little toy? What do we have to play ball? Yeah? Let's talk about playing ball. Do you like it? Do you appreciate it? Leave me alone. Stop talking about it. Stop talking about life. We sit and talk about life. Stop talking to me. I don't know what you want. I don't know what because the brain takes over. We're going to figure things out. Don't figure anything. You don't have to figure things out. You know everything. The moment I have to figure things out, it's already because there's a confusion. I'm trying to substitute life with understanding of life. Very hard for Jews who are intellectuals to deal with this. You have to know the limits of the brain. The brain is an unbelievable tool, but it's a tool. It's not reality. And sometimes all of reality we experience only in our brain and through our brain. But that's not how you experience life. I know about this problem. I have this problem. I'm talking from experience. I'm not talking I'm not talking abstract words. You could do it. And if you have a good brain, you could do it very well. Life becomes mathematics. Everything is mathematics. Everything. Problem is emotions are not mathematics. Dvekus is not mathematics. God is not mathematics. He's a mathematician. I don't mean mathematics is a gewaldige inyan. He's in the middle of calculating what I'm saying. But with mathematics, you can't dance. There's a formula for dancing. They'll tell you the formula how dancing works. But the dancing is the dancing. Dancing, losing yourself, losing the brain. I don't mean losing the brain. The brain is where the life is. But I mean losing the part of the brain that's busy analyzing and dissecting and giving conclusions and proofs and arguing and disputing. That's all I'm not one with whatever experience I'm in. Okay, this will be enough for today. Be'ezer Hashem will continue this Maimer on Monday morning, 7:45. And everyone should have a beautiful day. It's great to see you all. Shabbos will have the regular schedule. And Hatzlacha. Hatzlacha Rabbi. Yeah. Psudas Toivus, Hatzlacha, nice to see you.
You know, there is one phenomenal thing about the moon.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it's not mentioned in this story.
Go ahead.
The moon faces us,
Yeah.
always the same side.
Yeah.
We face always the same side
Yeah.
of the moon. There is a near side,
Yeah.
that's what we face.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
far side,
Yeah.
far side.
Yeah.
We face always the same.
Yeah.
It's like Orpanecha,
Yeah.
the presence of the punim of the moon
Yeah.
is always the same. Doesn't matter if we see it a little bit or
Right.
full or diminished. Or
We
not.
always face the same side of the moon.
Yeah, and the reason is because moon rotates,
Yeah.
and coincidentally, nobody understands why, the cycle of the moon rotation is the same as the cycle of the moon month. So basically, it rotates slowly the same way,
Right.
and therefore the same. We see only one side of the moon.
Right.
We never see the back side of the moon,
Right.
and I don't understand why it's not,
I hear you.
interpreted somehow. Because that's the most phenomenal thing of the moon.
That's powerful.
And
The rotation of the moon itself.
Yeah,
Yeah, the rotation.
I'm a moon. I'm rotating.
Yeah, so the moon rotates and the moon orbits the earth.
Okay, like let's say, like I say. I go
Wait,
like this.
wait.
Round and round.
Look, you understand Earth rotates. Wait, don't move.
Shouldn't be there.
You understand Earth rotates.
this
Do you understand?
Yeah, I want
The
to
same
follow,
as
yeah.
moon rotates.
There's understand.
Earth rotates once a day.
Okay.
24 hours.
24 hours, this is
Okay.
full spin.
Okay.
Full spin, that's
Oh,
our
yeah.
speed. Moon rotates once a month of lunar
Oh.
months. No, it doesn't rotate once a day. It rotates 29 days, whatever the cycle is, right?
Okay.
29 and a half. Yeah.
Right.
So it always shows us the same face.
We always see one face of the
We
moon.
see one side of the moon. If it's small or big,
Doesn't
always one side.
It's one side. Let's like here. I'm going like you, and you always see me. That's it.
Like you're rotating, you're not rotating.
I'm rotating
No,
around
you're the
you.
moon, you're the moon,
You're
right?
rotating. Yeah, I'm the moon.
So, okay.
And you always see me the same way. You see my face. You don't see my back.
How come?
Because I rotate around you, and my rotating around myself is the same.
I
think about it. All right. Which is
You're saying the moon rotates itself once a month.
right. Full cycle of the rotation of the moon.
So that's incredible.
No, doesn't spin
Yeah.
like Earth. Doesn't go around the eye. Just stands. It's
So-
something that
so
shouldn't
the
be
re-
It
there.
doesn't. So it doesn't rotate around its own axis. You
It
say,
does.
but only once a month.
Once it's basically
Looks like
his
someone
own
bring it
months.
and put it there.
It's a
That's when he
full-
rotates.
That's
Wow.
the rotation.
So the orbit around the Earth and the orbit around itself is
Synchronized
perfectly, and nobody knows why.
No, it's a phenomenal thing. We
Gewaldig.
don't understand how is it.
Gewaldig.
What is this coincidence?
Yeah, I think that this. I think what we're going to learn is going to explain that.
Really?
I think so.
Because it's just.
Moidedik. Ah,
We see the same face. It doesn't
same
change.
face. You would think, right, once in a while.
I thought maybe there's a Ani Hashem v'lo Shanisi. Maybe it's related. To
We'll
that.
see. It's going to be explained.
Because in a way we see the same face. It's just
Very nice. Very nice.
if we go in our choices, if we can see the other side of the moon as well. But
Ah,
I didn't have it honestly.
what you
I
say?
did not have it honestly.
But they never take the
I didn't hear
I
what.
did not understand it honestly, yes. How
Oh,
can
oh.
it be?
No, but one thing you do understand. But one thing you understand. If this is the Earth, no, but look, if the Earth is here, right? The moon is. It's not like you understand. Like. Sometimes you see a full moon, you see a crescent, but it's the same. Right.
just think about if a moon has a Moscow facing you, Moscow facing you, and on the other side is St. Petersburg, right? So the problem is you only see Moscow from Earth.
I'll figure it out. I'll come home at some point today. I'll look there. I'm sure there's somebody made YouTube video about it.
That's for sure.
Actually interesting.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Atzlacha Rabba.
It's my birthday today. So
Today.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
keep on, keep on spreading
Amen.
the way it does.
Amen.
I started coming this year, last year this time. I made a chlotta to learn Mercedes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Continue. So thank you.
So mazel tov for the anniversary and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Shavas shnas atzlacha and arichas yamim v'shanim tovos.
Amen. Thank you.
In good health and happiness. Tinek every
Most of the
day.
people go from Monsey to Tina.
They come to eat, but now we
For
come
restaurant,
here.
you come there. For
Not
this
only
kind
to
of
eat.
I come here for plastic bags.
We flee away.
Yeah, it travels from Tinek. Yeah.
No plastic bags.
Yeah.
He gave us it to Torah.
Yeah.
And his wife's name on it.
Yeah.
So he said he got divorced. He wants to get his wife's name. Yasha said, "Is Loshen? You gave her the cover. You don't want to be with her? Take the cell phone." This is Loshen.
Sehr schön.
Beautiful. I always saw this but
Very nice. So he had on the mantle of the Sefer Torah his wife and his wife's names. After the divorce, he wanted to take off her name. His wife's name, Shevalo Yashovson. Take off your own name. Take off your name. Don't take off. L'chiu mi'atias atzmech. Take off your name. Very nice.
I would go
Very
to
nice.
see the tshuva if it says those words.
Very nice. That's what Rabbi Yashiv wrote to him. Take off your own name. Take off your own name. Very nice.
So there was a sefer, a sefer as you call it, I don't remember to. I took it out and I looked. I opened up this tshuva. I said that for a foil Levine. Oh, now I remember. The sefer of the Kohen and foil Levine, they have tshuva one line for our Yashiv. You don't like the video? Take yourself off. I was thinking, I had the shaila a couple of friends of mine gave us it to they said, I never understood to tell them, take
Wow. Wow. Rashi sagt beide, ne? Derech is Zacher, Levana is Nekeva. Was da Malchus? So the Malchus is Rosh L'Shu'alim. Yeah? And Zon of Larayas. Zon of Larayas is when Malchus is up in the source. And then there's Rosh L'Shu'alim. So Zon of Larayas, it's Nukva. And then it becomes a Mashpia. So it's both.
I
By being makabel, it becomes a real mashpia.
Chaim Milkovsky, you know what Chaim Milkovsky is? The Amshin of Rebbe's,
Yeah.
the Amshin of Rebbe's tate.
Yeah.
Was er eben bei der Amshin of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He once said, am Rebbe Kebot, steht, ואיננו מאיר את השמש כירח, stimmt nicht. כירח לך השמש, ירח ist
Yeah, yeah.
to be a makabel. Also das ist ja da, wie sie werden meisten. ואיננו מאיר את השמש, ירח ist größer wie der Makabel. Wie der Neueste. Chaim Milkovsky. How do you
Yeah.
find out when